everybody. My name is Donna Steffens. I'm the director for the Time in the Valleys Museum. I just want to welcome you all here today to the program. For those of you who are not familiar with the museum, because I know we have a lot of people from all over the place at this program this afternoon. We are located on State Route 55 in Grahamsville, Sullivan County. We've got 3 levels of interactive exhibits when we're open. We also have an outdoor experience of a 1930s Catskill farm with a house, barn, working water wheel, lots of stuff to see. We are, of course, closed now, and hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll be open sometime in July. But we are open on the web, timeinthevalleymuseum.org. We do have virtual programs. We've got virtual exhibits. We've got tours. We've got games. We've got a whole bunch of different stuff to do. And you can also sign up for our mailing list, and you can get more information about other upcoming programs that we do and anything else that we do. I do send out a weekly email with some interesting things. So. Anyway, this afternoon, we are very happy to have with us Professor Ronald Knapp, who's going to be talking. He's the co-author of a book on covered bridges, practical crossings, nostalgic icons, and he's going to be talking about the covered bridges of the Mid Hudson region. I do, or at least I will, have all of you muted during the program. I will also mute you afterwards. You are very welcome to ask questions. If you can unmute yourself to ask the question, that's great. If you don't know how to unmute, I can certainly unmute you. Just sort of wave your hands and I will unmute you. Most of the icons for those things are on the bottom of the screen, and the muting is a little microphone that has a red line through it. You just click on that and you should be able to speak. So I guess we can start. Ron, I just want to thank you so much for coming and doing this program today. So I think
thank you very much, Donna. I'm only seeing 3 other people. Are there other people besides 3?
Right now I have 44.
Oh, okay, so it's a good number. Okay, maybe they'll rotate up on the screen, right? And that I know some who are there. Thank you very much. I gave a talk last year to the Time in Valleys Museum. I had not been to the museum before. It is really quite a gem. We in Ulster County actually do not have none of our towns has a museum as sophisticated as the one you have there in Grahamsville. I'm looking forward to going back and spending more time there. Now, let me tell you where I'm going to be going with this talk. You've seen this initial slide here, the Bridgeville Covered Bridge, and the talk is called The Great Covered Bridges of the Mid Hudson Region. Because of the way that I approach this topic, whether I'm talking in Ulster County or actually where I've given talks on covered bridges in other states, I don't just jump in to look at bridges, because from my perspective as a cultural historical geographer, bridges are not just simply objects. And if you objectify bridges, just simply look at them and take a picture of them, you actually lose really what the meaning of covered bridges are today and were in history. Now, let me just tell you how we're going to proceed. I move here to this slide. This is a slide of the cover of the book. I'm the junior author. The senior author is Terry Miller, who knows more about America's covered bridges than no more than about a handful of other people in America. I should tell you that this particular bridge here also is in Sullivan County, but it's in Sullivan County, Pennsylvania. But the book itself is the most comprehensive book ever done on America's covered bridges. It came out in 2014. It's discounted right now on Amazon, only $15 before it was close to 60 bucks, basically trying to sell out the stock. And the book basically takes 2 approaches. One, it looks at covered bridges as practical crossings in the 19th century. And then it goes to the present and looks back at how we look at covered bridges. And I want you to appreciate this particular approach so that when we get to Sullivan County bridges, you'll understand why I'm presenting them the way they are. First of all, the covered bridges that emerged in the 19th century in America, they were all utilitarian. They were built to meet immediate needs. And we'll see what I mean by that a little bit later. And they were initially just simply pragmatic products. In other words, they came about because of trial and error. And they were built by carpenters. They weren't built by engineers. They were built by people who knew wood because they had built churches, they had built houses, they had built halls and the like. And they had some sense of how one can span space. You'll see what I mean about that in a short while. And very clearly, these are all wooden. These are timber bridges, although many of the timber bridges as you got into the 19th century also included metal in them. We'll see some examples as we go along. And as you begin to look at the large number of covered bridges all across the United States, you realize that the carpenters actually were quite inventive. They were quite ingenious. They may have seen a pattern or they may have seen something that worked, and they always were trying to find some way that could make the structure even better to meet the circumstances they had. By and large, those who were building and sponsoring the building of covered bridges were very much future-oriented. They were meeting immediate needs, but they were looking towards the future. We'll see that a little bit later. And from my perspective, I think that these people were dreaming very, very big. They were kind of the moonshots of the day. They were doing things that had never been done before with technologies that had not been used before. And one of the things you may be surprised as we go along here, that these builders, some of the builders anyway, were very entrepreneurial. They expected to make money off of their designs. In fact, we're going to see that many of the designs were patented designs. In the very early part of the 19th century, individuals patented specific bridge designs, and they expected to get royalties from those designs. Many of them didn't get the royalties, but that was the expectation. And these bridges came about at the same time that turnpikes and canals were emerging in North America, in Eastern America, and later railways. And it may come as a surprise to you, even though we don't have any examples of this in New York, but there are covered bridges that are parts of canals. In other words, they're aqueducts that are covered. You see these in Indiana today. Many of them, and we're going to see an example here in Sullivan County, were parts of turnpikes that were increasingly popular in the first half of the 19th century. And although I'm not going to show any examples here today, that there were, and there still are, covered bridges that serve railroads. So there were railway covered bridges. So covered bridges that we may have seen in the counties in which we live only represent a small number of the large numbers of covered bridges that exist. And we'll talk about how covered bridges moved across the United States. Now, I alluded to this just a minute ago. Incidentally, am I coming across clearly? Okay, I'm not too far away from my microphone or too close. Okay? Now, the bridges that we see today actually hardly represent the types of bridges that were built in the 19th century. In fact, very few of them epitomize really the greatness of 19th century bridges. You're going to be surprised by a couple that you see in a while. And by and large, the public has forgotten what the great covered bridges were of the past. And this is because of the loss of so many of these bridges. I'll show you why many of the bridges got lost. And today, many people who look at covered bridges, they want to romanticize the past with them. In some states, and this is not true actually in New York State, covered bridge tourism is really big. Several of us have thought that actually Sullivan, Ulster, and Delaware County ought to put together a map of a route of covered bridges that we have here. Because whether we're talking about Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, certainly New England, Vermont, New Hampshire, tourism is very much driven by the existence of covered bridges. We have good covered bridges in our region, but we do not promote them for tourism purposes. Now, those who are specialists in covered bridges debate issues of preservation, renewal, and there's lots of controversy there. I won't get into that. And then there are issues of authenticity. Now let's move ahead here. Now, first of all, timber covered bridges, while we think of them as old and American, quintessentially American, actually covered bridges began elsewhere in the world before they emerged in America. But there is no evidence that any of the covered bridges from Europe or the builders of covered bridges in Europe ever had an impact on the building of covered bridges in North America. So no evidence of transmission. Now, probably the two most celebrated covered bridges in Europe are in Switzerland, but Switzerland has more covered bridges than any country in Europe, even though other countries like Germany, the northern part of Italy, Austria, Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic, these all have covered bridges today. Romania has covered bridges. And these are not as well known or as well studied as North American covered bridges. It may come as a surprise to you that actually the first evidence of covered bridges in the world is in China. We have archaeological evidence in China of a covered bridge 2,000 years ago. That's a long time ago. I should tell you, my specialty really is Chinese covered bridges. And my book on China's covered bridges will be out in the United States sometime later this month. But the earliest covered bridges emerged in China. This is archaeological evidence. Now, the oldest covered bridge in China actually dates to 1490, the end of the 15th century. This is what it looks like today. It looks rather fragile, but it is a very early covered bridge that looks ramshackle on the outside, but the interior really is quite elegant. This particular bridge is my photograph, which is on the cover of my new book. This is an extraordinary covered bridge in China that dates to 1625, and it's especially noted because of the structure of the bridge, the understructure of the bridge. I'll say nothing more about it right now, but I think if you look at this bridge and the one I just showed you, the Zhejiang Bridge, and the European bridges, you'll see that they look quite a bit different than American bridges look. Now here, let's get to North America. It's debatable as to how many covered bridges there once were in North America. Some bridges were built, they were destroyed, they were rebuilt, they were destroyed, they rebuilt. So there are many generations of some bridges, but some experts say there may be as many as 10,000, some even say 15,000 covered bridges built in the United States and Canada. Well, first of all, you're going to say, Canada? Canada has covered bridges? Yes, Canada has quite a few covered bridges. And while I've done this with audiences in the past, I've asked them, to say, which state has the most covered bridges? And most Americans, almost anywhere that you are, will say Vermont, New Hampshire, something of that sort. But actually, the most covered bridges are found today in Pennsylvania and Ohio. Vermont comes third, Indiana has a lot, and New York has about 33 of them. There are two provinces in Canada that actually have one, Quebec, one New Brunswick, have 86 and 63, really quite a few. And you can see these dots on this map that show the contemporary distribution of covered bridges in the United States and Canada. And there are 30 US states that have covered bridges. Some of them only have one. And there are 4 Canadian provinces that have covered bridges. So covered bridges are found everywhere, but there are an awful lot of Americans have never seen a covered bridge. I'm sure all of you have seen covered bridges. Now, this is an attempt to summarize how many covered bridges were built in various places. And this particular list it shows that Ohio had more covered bridges than any other state, something like 4,761, while Pennsylvania, which has more today, only has 2,068. The specialists I know in Ohio have said, well, we have more documented covered bridges because we have looked harder for our covered bridges. So they have found records of covered bridges that help accelerate this number, while other states like Pennsylvania and New York have really not accounted for their covered bridges in the same way. Now, what this list also shows is that Pennsylvania has the earliest covered bridge, 1805. I'll show you that in a short while. And New York actually has the second earliest covered bridge, 1807. And that happens to be in Sullivan County today. But we'll see where that gets a little more complicated, actually, when we go back. Now, here's a map which shows how these covered bridges have moved literally from the Northeast. Again, you can see the dots here, moving from 1805, 1810, 1820, 1830, 1850, until they reach the Middle West and reach the Deep South before jumping to the West Coast. And you may be surprised that California and Oregon have lots of covered bridges, but that is a fact. Now, why don't we know a lot about covered bridges in the past? And that is because a lot of them have been lost. Now, this, I'm not going to spend any time on this particular slide, but we can see up in the top left-hand corner where a tornado destroyed actually a mile-long covered bridge in 1896. A tornado in 2008 leveled a covered bridge in Indiana. Down in the lower left-hand corner, the Blenheim Bridge was washed away. We'll say more about that later, in 2011. And we'll see where arson, many bridges have been destroyed because of arson, and in some cases, especially in Pennsylvania in the 1960s, just local governments wanted to take them down because in this particular case, school buses, it was not legal to drive a school bus through a bridge. So kids would have to get off on one side of the bridge, the bus would go through, the kids would walk through and get back on the bus. And so local folks wanted to take the old covered bridges down and put modern bridges up. And then the other sad thing, as we can see on the lower right-hand corner, is hardly a month or two goes by without there being a report of a truck, in effect, doing great damage, or in many cases, actually destroying a covered bridge. Some people blame this on the driver. Some people blame it on the driver who follows GPS and pays no attention to signs. Now, here's a picture of a Pennsylvania bridge that was lost to arson. And this bridge was severely damaged in 2014, and it was rebuilt in 2019 at great cost. And you'll see there that something like 20 historical covered bridges in the United States have been lost to arson. And I'm quite certain, although I'm not absolutely certain about this, but I doubt whether any of the remaining covered bridges in Sullivan County have fire retardant on the outside. It is possible to get fire retardant paint that helps reduce damage done to arson. Once a bridge is lost to arson, the cost of replacing it is very, very high. We'll go on here. Here's a bridge in West Virginia. Today with cell phones, people capture pictures of bridges being burned. And this is what it looked like actually just a couple months later, charred and then later replaced. In China, even today, these bridges here, there are people with their cell phones, in effect, giving us pictures of a covered bridge being washed away. This is increasingly common, that today we see bridges being lost, but clearly you can appreciate in the 19th century, before photographs, before cell phones and the like, bridges were lost, and it just was an inconvenience to local folks who lost a bridge, but the folks outside didn't even know it existed, let alone that it was lost. Now, here's the Blenheim Bridge. This bridge was built in 1855, a very, very important bridge. It lasted until 2011 and then was reborn in 2018. It was a double barrel bridge. There weren't a lot of these so-called double two-lane bridges in North America, but some. It was a very important bridge. Many people traveled to Blenheim in Schoharie County to see this bridge that was bypassed, but it was an important bridge. And this is when it was lost in 2011. Many of you will remember Tropical Storm Irene that caused terrible damage in Ulster County, Sullivan County, Schoharie County, and the like. In this particular case, it just simply lifted the bridge up, carried it downstream, where it struck another bridge and was lost. The people in Schoharie County were devastated by this. Many people wanted it to be rebuilt, but the cost of rebuilding was so great that FEMA objected. But ultimately, with a lot of political pressure, it was decided to rebuild the bridge, and the bridge was rebuilt in 2018, and it looks today like this. It's a bypass bridge. It means it's just for pedestrians today. It's been raised. It's unlikely to be washed away again. But this series shows you how the face of a bridge, the structure of a bridge, the nature of a bridge can change over time, sometimes well documented and sometimes not. Now let's just step back now. How did people approach bridges, approach streams, creeks, rivers in the past? Well, fording was very, very important. And some of you may live in towns, as I do in New Paltz, where we have an old ford road that leads to an old ford. That we also, in many places, have roads that have a name that's tied to a ferry, like the Miller Ferry in Alabama, or the Dunsbach Ferry in New York. I don't know of a ferry road in Sullivan County. If any of you know one, please let me know. Actually, I meant to say that at the very beginning. I may make some Sullivan County mistakes along the way. If I do make a mistake, don't hesitate to send me an email and let me know. If you have a piece of information that you think I ought to know, send me an email. I'll give you my email address a little later. Now, when we look at this map on the left-hand side, you can see a bridge in New England, the Connecticut River, and then you begin to see the Hudson River, the Delaware River, the Susquehanna River, the Ohio River, the Wabash River, the Illinois River, the Mississippi River. Each of these rivers, as you moved west in the United States, created much greater challenges than was the case in New England or many of the streams in New York or in Pennsylvania. There was, about the same time, the building of canals. We'll link some of this a little bit later. Now, along the way, and you can find a lot of information in historical records about this, where people did not want to ford a stream, they began to build so-called beam bridges, simply taking a log, laying it across abutments, stone abutments on both sides, and creating a bridge that served a necessary purpose, and that if it got washed out, it could be replaced fairly quickly. And these are found all over the United States, not just simply in the Northeast, but all over the United States. Now, a fact of the matter is, trees can grow to great heights, but it's very rare to find a beam bridge that has a beam that is as long as, say, 60 feet, let alone a beam, say, 100 feet. Most beam bridges did not exceed anything more than about 30 feet. And beams sagged, beams rotted, that nature conspired against using beams over a long period of time. Now, in the latter part of the 1700s, the 18th century, in New England, there were some individuals who began to experiment with ways of spanning a greater space, greater distance than, say, 30 feet or 40 feet or 50 feet. And they did this by working with something that had been known very clearly in Europe. Carpenters knew this because they employed it in barns, they employed it in churches and the like, and that was using timber trusses. Timber trusses basically are structures that are put above a beam utilizing triangles, basically, to support the beam. Some people say to lift the beam. And these are some of the common trusses on the left that were used. The so-called king post truss, the queen post truss, and then the multiple king post truss. These were used widely in the world. Nobody invented them. They have been around a long, long time and employed by carpenters. And then in the early part of the 19th century, American carpenters, who were very creative, very inventive, began to design new types of trusses that would allow greater expanses to be covered than the king post, the queen post, or to some respects, the multiple king post. And each of these typically has a name. Some of the best known are just shown here: the Burr truss, the Child's truss, the Howe truss, the Pratt truss, the Long truss, and the Town truss. We're going to see a lot of Town truss in Sullivan County in a while. Now, each of these trusses not only had a name, they were patented. In other words, those individuals went to the US Patent Office and they patented their design with the expectation that those who would use their design would send some kind of a royalty back to them. The fact of the matter is that a lot of the patents were ignored, and even if a carpenter was reasonably honest, he would tweak the design and say that it was his and it wasn't patented. Now, it's useful right at this particular point to ask this question: why are covered bridges covered? Now, here's a picture of a covered bridge being built, the cover of a covered bridge being put on the bridge. And the purpose of that cover, actually, fundamentally, is to protect the truss. In other words, if there's anything you take away from the talk today, and that is that covered bridges are covered to protect the trusses. The trusses, the timber trusses, were the most expensive part of the bridge. And while it was debated in the early part of the 19th century, if you covered the trusses, would this protect the trusses or would it lead to deterioration of the trusses? Generally, very quickly, people believed that if you covered the trusses, a timber truss that might only last 10 or 20 years with a cover might last a half a century or a whole century. So the cover was put on the bridge to protect the truss, the timber truss. Now here, let's look at this. This is a bridge. It looks like it has sides. Actually, covered bridges typically have sides and have a roof. And you can't really see the roof on there until you zoom in. And then when you zoom in, you see that this particular bridge has sides, but it doesn't have a roof. Well, that actually happens also to be a covered bridge, but it's called a boxed pony truss covered bridges. And there are lots of those covered bridges, and even some of them in Sullivan County. They no longer exist in Sullivan County, and they no longer exist in Ulster County, but along the D&H Canal, there were something like 30 of these at one point between 1908 and the end of the, between 1808 and the end of the century. Take a look at this bridge. This is also a boxed pony truss. The trusses are covered. It's a king post truss, and there's no roof, but it's a covered bridge. I mean, this is the specialists who focus on covered bridges see this as a covered bridge. Now, is a roof necessary in a covered bridge? No. But most covered bridges we see today, virtually all covered bridges we see today, have a roof. But there are still quite a few pony truss covered bridges in the United States that do not have roofs. Now, nobody has been able yet to figure out when the idea of a covered bridge first began to emerge in the United States. Historians have found, however, that in 1787, there is a drawing of an American covered bridge that dates to 1787. But there's no evidence that that bridge actually was ever built. The first documented covered bridge dates simply to 1805. What I just showed you a minute ago, it was built first uncovered, and then it was covered. It's a beautiful bridge. Timothy Palmer's so-called permanent bridge in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, across the Schuylkill River. Quite a dramatic bridge. In other words, you could almost say the first American covered bridge was an extraordinary covered bridge in the early part of the 19th century. It was replaced, like so many, and then here it is depicted in a painting in the foreground with another great bridge in the back, both across the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia. Two really extraordinary early 19th century bridges. We have no existing covered bridge in the United States. Some people are going to debate this with me, that is as beautiful as these two earliest 19th century bridges. I mean, it's very important not to forget these great bridges in the past. Now, bridges come at different lengths. We're going to see a couple of them, 200 or so feet in a while. I don't know if any of you can imagine that there were covered bridges in the 19th century that were more than 1 mile long. This particular bridge, which is to the south of Harrisburg on the Susquehanna River, which is a very, very wide river. The first bridge was built in 1814, first covered bridge in 1814. It was destroyed in 1832 by ice. No pictures of it that we found so far. Remember, there were no cameras at that time. It was replaced by a 2-story bridge we can see here. And that 2-story bridge lasted another 30 years from 1834 to 1863. And then tragically, it was burned during the Civil War when, in an attempt to stop the movement of Confederate troops between Columbia in Lancaster County and Riceville in York County to the west, a fire was started. There was no expectation that the bridge would be consumed completely, but it was consumed. It was rebuilt, and then that rebuilt bridge actually was destroyed in 1896 by the remnants of a hurricane. Now, let's get to New York State. Now that we have a sort of a national, or at least a northeastern reference as far as covered bridges are concerned, we'll look at New York. Now, in New York, no one knows exactly how many covered bridges ever existed in New York, but those who specialize in New York say it's more than 300. I suspect it's a lot more than 300. We just haven't been able to do the county by county research to tell us exactly what's there. Why, you might ask, why is it difficult to do county by county research? Well, a friend of mine who worked more than 40 years ago in Ohio dealing with county records, he was dealing with musty county records that were kept in containers in the basement or attic of a town hall. In many cases, towns simply destroyed their records because they were just too old, just the paper deteriorated and the like. But if they were there, it was possible to get through them. In Ulster County, we're pretty lucky. We have a lot of records that are available, and in New Paltz, a lot of our records, not all, but a lot of our records have been digitized, and we can go back and look at them. It appears as if in the Mid Hudson region, in Ulster, Sullivan, Dutchess, and Orange. Now, I think you guys who live in Sullivan County consider yourself in the Mid-Hudson. Certainly those of us in Ulster do. We learned recently, you know, with the governor's plan that the Hudson Valley here, the Mid Hudson Valley, also includes Westchester. You know, that's sort of upstate and the like. Typically in New Paltz, we don't think of Westchester as being part of the Mid Hudson. We can consider Greene County, Delaware County as being in the Mid Hudson. We can see with these numbers here that Delaware County once had 64 covered bridges. Many of them were in the Catskills region, and today there are only 5 of them left. Ulster County had perhaps 38, and 5 of them remain. Sullivan County had 19, and it has 4. We'll look at those 4, and hopefully we have time to get the 5 in Ulster as well. Dutchess only had 5, it doesn't have any more. Orange had 9 and doesn't have any more. So just in the 4 counties here, more than 66, perhaps 70, were built, and only 9 of them are still standing. Now, let's go a little bit north here, because this will help put the Bridgeville Bridge into some comparative perspective. North of Albany, between Lansingburgh and Waterford, Theodore Burr, who was a great bridge builder, and his trusses were built in Sullivan County, Ulster County, throughout Pennsylvania, farther in New York. He built a bridge across the Hudson River. And this was an extraordinary bridge, as you can see here, and it was built between 1803 and 1804. This is actually before what we call the first documented covered bridge in Philadelphia. But that bridge was not covered until 1814. In other words, people were debating whether it was a good idea to cover it, and because it took so long to cover it, it's not considered the first American covered bridge. And this was even before he patented his truss, and down below here you can see the truss. It's a very sophisticated truss. As we can see, it's a 4-span, 800 feet long bridge. The bridge functioned pretty well until 1909, when it was lost to fire. And then it was replaced by a historic iron bridge here. Bridges, even in New York State, there are a lot of interesting and odd bridges. This was a bridge that crossed the Mohawk River sometime between 1808 and 1809. It also was very, very early bridge that was not smooth going across. It was sort of up and down, but it wasn't covered until 1825. You know, almost 20 years after it was built. It was demolished in 1871 and then finally replaced. Now, the oldest covered bridge in New York State is in Otsego County. Now, having seen some of these great bridges just a minute ago, this doesn't really look like you know, an extraordinary bridge. It's great because even though it dates to 1825 and it's only 53 feet long, it is the oldest historical covered bridge still standing in the United States. First thing I would say, in New York State, and actually it's the oldest in the United States as well. So New York takes great pride in the Hyde Hall covered bridge. It's in the Glimmerglass State Park, and it's certainly worth visiting. Let me just say something about this bridge. The folks who have done research on this bridge, when they went back to the records of when this bridge was built, the records do not indicate that a covered bridge was built. But the records indicate that a lot of timber was used in the building of the bridge. And it was extrapolated when all of that timber would not simply have been used to build just a plain bridge, but that timber was used to cover the bridge. You'll see why that's important when I get to Ulster County. Now, this may come as a surprise to some of you, but Ulster County used to really be quite large. In fact, during the days in which New York was an English colony, Ulster County was one of the largest counties in the eastern section of the state, you know, to the west of Dutchess and to the north of Orange, which was small. And in 1683, there were 12 counties in New York. And later, as we're going to see, Sullivan County and portions of present-day Delaware, Orange, and Greene counties were taken from Ulster County, and Ulster County became smaller. Now, let's see here. And this happened in Sullivan County in 1809. And so this then brings us to a historical fact that Bridgeville Bridge, which was built in 1807, which county was it built in? Well, it was built in Ulster County because there was no Sullivan County in 1807. Today it's in Sullivan County, but then it was in Ulster County. Now here we are in Sullivan County. Now there are only 4 remaining historical bridges in Sullivan County, and at least 15 that we know of that have been lost. And you guys who are from Sullivan County know Sullivan County better than I do. You clearly know that much of the western part of your county drains into the Delaware system, as you know, and even in the eastern part drains into the Delaware system as well, but at Port Jervis. But you may not have thought of the fact that some of your streams, such as the Beaverkill or the Willow Weemock, as well as the Neversink, that actually they start in Ulster County, and they then flow through Sullivan County down to the Delaware River. So we're going to see actually that some of the covered bridges in the western part of Ulster County look a lot like the covered bridges that either exist or once existed in Sullivan County. Now, I've used color coding here. The red indicates lost, the green indicates still existing. And so we can see that there were 5 Delaware River bridges, 4 Willow-Weemock Creek bridges, 4 of them that were lost, 2 still there, 1 lost on Chestnut Creek, 1 still in existence in Beaverkill, 1 lost, 1 existing on the Neversink, 3 lost on the Neversink, and 4 plus on the Delaware and Hudson Canal. Before moving on to the Delaware and Hudson Canal, I've been working actually with Bill at the Delaware and Hudson Museum in High Falls. I gave a talk in New Paltz one day where I showed that Pony Truss Bridge in High Falls and called it a covered bridge. And he said he had never thought of that bridge as being a covered bridge because it didn't have a roof. So I then showed him that really a covered bridge did not have to have a roof. So he began to go through his records, photographic records. They have great photographic records of the D&H Canal in the 19th century. And he has found about 30 pictures of pony truss bridges along the D&H Canal. So he and I are going to work, this Bill Merchant and I are going to work on an article that talks about these great bridges. Only 1 or 2 of them are even included in many of the summaries that are there. Plus, at the very bottom here, I show that the Grahamsville Chestnut Creek covered bridge, which was built in 1976, is there. That, however, today is not considered an historical bridge yet. Typically, a historical bridge has to be around for 50 years, and this one really has not quite got to 50 years, but that's only a few years off. It'll be 50 years old and then can be considered historic, but that makes many of us historic as well. Now let's look, here's a map of Sullivan and Ulster counties once they were divided. And this is a map from 1822. And what it shows is a turnpike that ran from Newburgh through Bridgeville to Coshecton. And it's one of the earliest turnpikes in New York. And it was a turnpike that required the building of some bridges. And the most important bridge that we know of was the one at Bridgeville. Perhaps I'm like many of you, I had come down Route 17 many times and saw the sign to Bridgeville and never got off. Always wondered what was there. I'll show you in a little while. Finally, earlier this year, actually about a month ago, I got off there and found some very interesting things concerning the Bridgeville, the former Bridgeville Bridge. Now, this is what the turnpike looked like, at least in the latter part of the 19th century. It certainly doesn't look like the thruway here. It, was a dirt road that passed through Bridgeville. This is a picture of Bridgeville. Bridgeville was a hamlet at that particular time, and it ran literally from the Hudson River to the Delaware River. There's a picture of it that I showed at the very beginning. It really was quite a substantial bridge. It was about 160 feet long, really quite a span at that time for an early bridge. We know who built it. We don't have a lot of pictures of the inside of it. And it is a very important bridge that needs to be better known. Now, when I visited that bridge site a month or so ago, I was disappointed not to see a historical marker, but Alan, the town of Thompson historian who I contacted, told me that actually last fall the highway department took them down in order to clean them, and they just haven't gotten up yet. So there is a historical marker for the timber bridge, and I understand there also is a historical marker for the successor bridge, the iron bridge. Now here are a couple more shots of the bridge. You can see it was a double barrel bridge with a pedestrian route right up the middle of it. It was a very impressive bridge for the time. Not well studied yet. Alan told me that he's quite certain that in the Sullivan County Historical Society's archives that there's some useful information there, but the archives are closed now. And as soon as it's open, I expect to go down and do some more digging about this bridge. I think it needs to be better known, not only in Ulster County, but also in Sullivan County. One of the interesting things about that bridge, and here's a photo that was taken in 1907 on its centenary 100th birthday, and that was that there were on both ends of it some very substantial billboards. I remember people approached the bridge, on horseback or in a wagon and the like, so they had plenty of time, literally, to read what was put there as they passed through the bridge. But this is a 1907 celebratory postcard. Now, when I went, let me go back here just a minute here. When I visited the bridge, tried to find the bridge, it was very easy actually to find the bridge. I went both on the Holiday Mountain side that some of you know, as well as the other side. And one of the reasons I went was I've always been interested in abutments. And I did what I could to make sure that the bridge at New Paltz, that the historic abutments were left there and not torn down when the bridge was improved. And so a couple people on a Facebook page indicated that they were quite certain that the original dry laid stone was still there, but they hadn't seen it for a long time. So I went to see, and when I went there, I saw that yes, the original abutments are there. But then, strangely, above it were these things that stick out, these abutments made out of cement. Now this, the easiest explanation was that when they tore down the timber bridge and built the iron bridge, that they built it on top of the abutments of the original abutments. And they did this in 1923 when cement and iron and everything was available, except the records that I had seen in the past say that the iron bridge was built beside the covered bridge, and after that bridge was built, the timber bridge was torn down. Now, I don't think these cement structures were there for the 1807 bridge, unless the 1807 bridge later in the 19th century was raised for some reason, and then these cement abutments were put in. I don't have an answer to that yet, and Alan doesn't have the answer to it either. Now, this is what the iron bridge that replaced it looks like, and when I look at the abutments from here, it does look like they're the same abutments. So, but I don't have definitive proof on this yet as well. Now, if we continue that turnpike from Newburgh through Bridgeville all the way to the Delaware River at Coshecton, we can see that at some point a bridge was built across the Delaware River there. Before that, there was a ferry. Now, the records that I've seen are not definitive in terms of whether that westernmost Sullivan County bridge there was built early or whether it came in the middle of the 19th century. Don't really know that yet. But we do know that it was lost in 1902 because of ice, an ice dam and the flood that was tied with it. And that bridge then was replaced. And the one that we see there today, which I haven't been across, was built in 1950, 70 years ago. Now let's look at a couple of the bridges that are still there. This particular bridge, I think many of you know this particular bridge. In fact, several of the Sullivan County bridges are associated with parks, and therefore these are popular places for people to go for picnics, and they're also in locations where people who like to fly fish go and can wade into the water very, very easily and then fish for trout. Now, many people today, myself included, often call this the Livingston Manor Bridge. And as you can see here with the sign that's there, which formerly was the Mott's Flat Bridge, or later known as the Van Tran Bridge. And some people call it the Van Tran Bridge, some call it the Flat Bridge, some call it the Livingston Manor Bridge, built in 1860. And it is the oldest standing bridge, covered bridge in Sullivan County. Now, what's a couple of very interesting things about it. One is that it has a timber approach. So in effect, you go up onto the bridge by crossing this, as we can see here. Let's get this down here. Whoops. My pointer's not working. Let me see here if I can get a... It doesn't want to go. Anyway, you can see the you can see the approach that's here, the timber approach that's here with it. And it was built by an individual who's responsible for many of the bridges in Sullivan County. In fact, several of those that are still in existence, and that's a fellow by the name of John Davidson. Although when you look at the records, you see that there are several other individuals who claim participation, at least, in the building of some of Sullivan County's bridges. It was built in 1860. It was abandoned more than 100 years later in 1972, and then it was restored in 1984-85. And it's a very, very nice bridge. A couple nice things about it. One is that you can drive across it. So this is something you do very, very often in Vermont. And I don't want to knock Vermont bridges, but very often the Vermont bridges that you can cross actually do not have working trusses on the inside. They have steel I-beams under them. And in many cases, those Vermont bridges have been widened or they've been made higher than they were originally. So trucks and buses can go through them. This bridge is pretty much as it once was, and I don't believe its dimensions have been changed. But if anybody knows that they have been, let me know. It's 117 feet long. Now you also see on this particular picture here that there are buttresses on the side. Now these buttresses we can see, whoops, I guess we can't see them on the next one. These are very common on bridges in western Sullivan County, in Sullivan County and western Ulster County. They were used basically to stabilize the truss that's on the inside. We'll see them on other bridges that we look at, but they're more characteristic here than they are elsewhere. Inside, we can see the lattice truss on both sides here very, very clearly, basically like a garden trellis with these stone, these timber pieces called trennels, which are used to lock the two pieces together. When that bridge was built in the 19th century, it only had a town lattice truss. But when the bridge was stabilized in 1984-85, they added these laminated arches in it, which then made the bridge stronger for heavier vehicles that crossed it, but they weren't in the original design of the bridge. Now, I'm not sure any of you were around in 1913, but this was the original Livingston Manor covered bridge. Now, where was it? Well, it was in the hamlet of Livingston Manor. The current so-called Livingston Manor bridge is not in the hamlet itself, it's outside the hamlet. And this bridge also was built in 1860 at the same time that John Davidson built the other one we just saw, and it was 100 feet long, so it was pretty similar in length. In 1930, interestingly, that bridge was taken down, and it was divided in two. And then half of it was reborn as another bridge. And that other bridge you call today the Bendo Covered Bridge. Now, the Bendo Covered Bridge, you could say, dates back to 1860, but actually is only half of the 1860 bridge. And it's on the same stream, but not at the same location. It's upstream of that original one. And in 1970, a date that some of you may remember, there was a storm, and part of that bridge actually dropped into the stream, and it took a few years, literally, for the bridge to be put back on its abutments, and then it was rebuilt again in 1985. But when it was rebuilt with what is called a stringer, and therefore it's called a stringer bridge. So it's, you can see the town lattice truss on the inside, but that town lattice truss is not holding it up. What's holding it up are I-beams underneath. So it, in some respects, you could say it's historical because it dates to 1860, but it does not have a functioning truss, and therefore it's not an historical bridge by definition. Now, also in the town of Rockland is the Beaverkill Bridge. Now, Beaverkill, I didn't know until I started doing some research with it, actually was a fairly thriving community back in the middle of the 19th century. And it was a thriving community principally because of the location of tanneries in that area, where, as we can see to some degree in the picture there on the left, that the hill slopes were denuded of the hemlock trees that were there. The bark of the hemlock tree was used to tan leather. which obviously came from the animals in the woods. And then the hemlock was used for building purposes, sometimes in the building of the bridges, obviously in the building of houses and barns and the like as well. Mid 19th century, early 20th century pictures of much of Ulster County and Sullivan County show denuded hill slopes, very, very different from what we see today. On the upper right-hand corner, we can see those buttresses, 4 buttresses here on the Beaverkill Bridge. This is the Beaverkill Bridge today, which has been restored. When I visited about 3 weeks ago, I was the only person there. There actually were cars parked there, but I'm not sure where all these people walked off to. It's a very, very nice bridge. The town lattice truss is in very, very good shape, and cars and trucks can cross it very, very well. So these are significant bridges there. Now, the town of Neversink is the Halls Mills covered bridge. I've always liked the Halls Mills covered bridge, and disappointed as I was when I was there a couple of weeks ago, that it said that the bridge was closed. Not only closed, obviously, to vehicles, no vehicles have gone across it since 1963, but they don't even want pedestrians to walk across it. Now that bridge, although it was built, completed in 1912, there seems to be evidence that there was at least 1 and maybe 2 covered bridges at that site prior to 1912, but I've not found details of it at all. This one has 6 of those stabilizing buttresses on both sides. Now, I thought I put in here, but I did not put in here. Just a few years ago, the pier, the abutment on this end of it, on the left-hand side of it, actually was washed out so badly that it looked like, with a little bit more of effort, the bridge would collapse. There were people associated with the New York State Covered Bridge Society and people locally in Sullivan County that came and got the county to, in effect, rebuild the pier that's there, that serves here kind of as an abutment at the end of the bridge, to stabilize that bridge so it's not lost. Inside, it's also a town lattice truss, and it's which is in very, very good shape. I looked into the bridge when I was there 2 weeks ago. It was very, very dark, but my iPhone picked up very, very nice pictures on the inside. Now, the Gramesville Bridge, as I said, was built in 1976. Also goes into a park. While it does not show clear buttresses on both sides, it shows buttresses, and I'm sorry, it shows supports on both sides and walkways on both sides. In Sullivan County, here's one of the bridges that was lost in Woodburn. On the left, it shows it as a 2-span bridge with a pier in the middle. On the right-hand side, it basically shows just one end of what really was a very, very nice bridge. The Mongop Bridge, which was built in 1830, it's an early bridge, and was lost and replaced in 1910. This is the Neversink covered bridge, a couple of views of it here. It also was a town lattice. You can see some sense of that by looking at the opening at the top of the bridge. And this bridge, I've been told, this bridge site, I've been told, is now underwater. If somebody knows that it's not underwater, please let me know. Narrowsburg, another bridge, another great bridge across the Delaware River. And it is said that this bridge was also preceded by another covered bridge. The Parkston Bridge, another town lattice, also with buttresses here between Livingston Manor and DeBruce. Now here are 2 of these box pony bridges along the D&H Canal. You see the one on the lower right-hand side, the lower left-hand side. You have to peek to see it, but fortunately somebody did take a picture of it after the canal dried up. So we can see that there was actually at the beginning of the 20th century, a boxed pony bridge in Wurtsboro, Sullivan Street. Now, just if your interest in this has been whetted, I have some links here, and Donna may make an effort to make this PowerPoint presentation available either as a YouTube presentation or another Zoom presentation on the Time and Valley's website. But here are 4 very important websites. One is the New York State Covered Bridge Society website. One is the National Society for the Preservation of Covered Bridges website. And equally important is one called Covered Spans of Yesteryear, where you can go county by county all over the United States and see pictures of old covered bridges. A lot of the covered bridges that are identified, there are no pictures. And another one, Bridge Hunter, which shows not only the old bridges, but some of the newer bridges. And for those of you that like to do bridging in your car, there's a very good book called Spanning New York State, a driving tour of New York State covered bridges, and it's available from Bob and Trish Kane, and there's their address there. I'm going to go through Ulster County here very, very quickly, since I see we've gone more than an hour. In Ulster County, there are 5, 33, maybe 36, maybe 40, who knows? The ones in the Catskill Mountains, these are all in the Catskill Park, and they're most likely like other covered bridges that are in the Catskill Park in the Sullivan Catskills that are no longer there, smaller bridges. We can see that 3 of them are there, and at least 13 are lost. We can see in the Rondout watershed that there's 1 remaining, and probably about 13 or more that are gone. Now, it may be quite interesting here just to point out the fact here, I live in New Paltz in the Wallkill River Valley, but I'm calling this part of the Rondout watershed. The Wallkill River flows into the Rondout Creek. Usually creeks flow into rivers, but in this case, the Wallkill River flows into the Rondout Creek, which flows then into the Hudson River. And along the Wallkill River, there is 1 bridge, which we'll see in a minute. And then in the Esopus watershed, and the Esopus watershed, is up into the Catskills area, and like your reservoir system in Sullivan County, we have the Ashokan system up there, and here we find 1 existing bridge and perhaps 10 bridges that are missing. Now, these are the bridges that we find in western Ulster County, that I suspect there were bridges like this in the northern parts of Sullivan County. These are all in the town of Hardenburg. These are relatively small bridges. This one's 43 feet long. It crosses Dry Brook. A brook flows into a creek. Creek flows into a river, and eventually into the Delaware system. Here's another one, crosses Dry Brook. It's only 27 feet long, a very picturesque bridge. It's on private property, but you can get a picture of it from the road. There's another bridge in the town of Hardenburg, which is about 62 feet long, again, like those in Sullivan County with buttresses here. And then there's another one of these interesting ones that is moved, that earlier was in the town of Hardenburg, in the upper reaches of the Beaver Kill. The Beaver Kill began in Ulster County, in Turnwood, and it was moved in 1939, actually, into Olive Bridge, which is in the town, which is in, I guess, the town of Olive Bridge. Now, where this gets really difficult, and I've spent a lot of time looking at handwritten records, digitized handwritten records, and I'm trying to find out basic information about Perrines Bridge. Perrines Bridge is the longest and oldest covered bridge in Ulster County. And it also has the largest burr truss anywhere in New York State. When you go back and you look at the handwritten records. On the left-hand side, in 1825, I can see a record about the repairing of the bridge across the Wallkill near the house of James Perrins. That's the person the bridge was named after. The repairing of a bridge. So there was a bridge there. 2 years later, money was allocated, only $11, for further repairing the bridge. We don't know what the nature of that bridge was. If it was a covered bridge, it actually would be equal to the oldest covered bridge in New York State, 1825. But I haven't found corroborating evidence that it was covered. I can find in 1834 that money was allocated to build a bridge. In other words, there had been a bridge and now a new bridge is being built. So there's a lot lost here. This is Perrins Bridge. I prefer today to say that that bridge dates from the 1840s, even though if you go to the bridge, you'll see that there's a sign that dates it to 1844. The sign also dates it to the wrong person. It crosses the bridge. It was rehabilitated in 1968. This bridge almost lost its life, however, when the New York State Thruway was being built. The engineers decided the Thruway was going to be placed at a location in which it was necessary to take down the bridge. Calm voices, though, interjected, and the Perrins Bridge, or some people call it Perrins Bridge, was continued. The new bridge was to its west, and there are some people that say that the Perrins Bridge is viewed by more Americans than any bridge in the whole country. Now, that probably is true if you consider seeing a bridge for 1 or 2 sections traveling, 1 or 2 seconds traveling at 65, 70, 75 miles an hour. You see it, now you see it, now you don't. And many people told me that they saw it and then they try to find it and they never can find it. But it's not all that difficult to see. Here's a picture of it when it was rededicated here with the New York State Thruway there as well. One of the sad bridges is one that we have it was in the town of New Paltz, now it's in the town of Gardner, and it's called the Phillies Bridge. We have a Phillies Bridge Road, but there's no Phillies Bridge on Phillies Bridge Road. And that's because the bridge had been condemned in 1948 and closed. And then the town was concerned about liability issues, and they built a fire and burned it. So we have pictures of the bridge taken by Irma DeWitt, and we have pictures of it when it was burned in 1952. Now, I've been to that bridge site because I'm interested in the abutments, and those abutments that you can see there actually are on the site of the actor whose name has just left me. I'm sorry about that. It'll come to me in just a minute. Who has his house on the other side. These are other bridges in the town of Gardner today. In Tuttletown. The New Paltz Bridge, this is another one that gives me a lot of trouble. Many of us today say that it is an 1850s bridge, but I can find records in which in 1833, somebody wrote that the public road leading from the Paltz Bridge to Kettleboro was authorized. So there was a bridge there, but I don't know what kind of a bridge it was. In 1854, actually I have many other documents here that show the mention of a New Paltz Bridge, but have no specific information about when the bridge was built. Here is that New Paltz Bridge. Those abutments are still there. These are the successor bridges That was the second bridge in 1912, condemned in 1938, replaced by this bridge in 1940, and then more recently in 2016, replaced by this bridge. Incidentally, if you look at the bridge today, that is a pony truss bridge, but it's not a boxed pony truss because it's not boxed in. It does not have to be boxed in because it's made of steel. And the 1912 bridge, the 1940 bridge, they're not covered and they're not pony bridges. And they're neither covered nor pony bridges. Well, they're not pony bridges because they have braces that go across the top. And they're clearly not covered. Here are a couple more bridges, and we're going to be wrapping up here in just about now. In Kingston, there was one bridge that is shown on this particular map in 1875, way in the background there. And we have one photograph of it from about 1893. Quite an interesting bridge. Now, I think with the Kingston Bridge, without then going to Saugerties and some of the other interesting towns in Ulster County, we'll call it quits. And if some of you have to go, feel free to go. And if some of you have a question, you can unmute yourself, or Donna can unmute you if you hold up your hand, and then you can ask a question. No questions?
Somebody has to have a question, but I don't see anybody with their hand raised.
I see.
I do.
Lee Rosenthal. Well, I see Patty Gates and Lee Rosenthal.
I only wondered how many of the bridges in Pennsylvania were built by Amish.
Very few. Very few. And in fact, I'm not sure one could say that any of the historical bridges were built by Amish. Now, interestingly enough, we have significant Amish populations in New York, in Pennsylvania, and increasingly in recent decades in Ohio and Indiana, where the Amish have moved into what you might call abandoned farmland, or farms that had been sold. People no longer wanted to work. So in Lancaster County in Pennsylvania and other counties in Pennsylvania, we often associate Amish with covered bridges. And it is really picturesque to see horse-drawn carriages going across historic covered bridges. But it's unlikely that those Pennsylvania covered bridges during those early days were being crossed by Amish in horse and buggies, but they were being crossed by local folks or long distance folks in their wagons or carriages.
Okay, thank you.
That's a good question. I mean, it's hard for me to say that none were built, but I would have to look more carefully, community by community, in some of those counties to see whether the Amish were involved in building the bridges. Many of the bridges that were built in the early part of the 19th century, especially those that were tied to turnpikes, these were toll bridges. They were built by entrepreneurs who expected to make monies from the toll roads and the toll bridges. The fact of the matter is, though, that most toll roads and most toll bridges went bankrupt. That's just the way life is, in the business world. And many of these toll roads, toll bridges were then taken over by towns, taken over by counties, and then they were made free. And then it was the county or the town that had the responsibility for maintaining the bridge until they become a burden, and then the towns did what the towns wanted to do with it, and then let them often deteriorate. Hope that's a satisfactory answer.
Yeah, and I mean, they were known for building, so I didn't know if they built any of the bridges or not.
I'm sorry?
They were known for building, so I don't know if they built any of the bridges or not.
Yeah, that's a very good, you've asked a very good question. Nobody's ever asked me that question before. I'm going to do some digging really
Okay.
with that. I got your name, Patty, okay, and you live in Sullivan County, right? So,
Well, you can just leave a message at the museum.
okay. But I mean, certainly the the Amish are known for building with timber, and they're known for group building, Actually, I should tell you that the Perrines Bridge in New Paltz, which is actually in the town of Esopus, town of Rosendale today. The ends are on different ends. It actually, the group that oversees it are those who live in the Bruderhof. I don't know if you're familiar, the Society of Brothers who live in Riften, New York. But
Okay.
they have a key to the bridge, and they keep an eye on the bridge, and they've done a lot of work to remove graffiti and to do some of the minor carpentry work in there as well. They're good neighbors to the
Good.
bridge.
Oh, it's
Okay,
an
you had a
excellent
question.
talk.
Thank you.
I was wondering if there was a way to be notified if this is available. I know a number of people who would be very interested in seeing this. Is there a way to get a link to a version of this talk?
I'll leave that to Donna. Donna, I don't know what your plan is.
Well, I am recording it, and it will be on our website. We may put it on YouTube too, but definitely on our website, because people have asked that haven't been able to come today that want to see it. So it'll be there for sure.
Now, she's recording it. She's recording it as a Zoom talk. Now, people have to use Zoom to get it, but it is possible to take a Zoom talk and save it as a YouTube talk, YouTube video talk. So Donna may want to try that as well, and she can save it as a YouTube talk. Then literally anybody, anywhere in the world can access it without having Zoom.
I'll look into that for sure.
That would be very useful, I think. Absolutely.
For several reasons. One is that I went over a lot of this stuff quite quickly. And so
Yes.
there was information on the slides, the text, that you may want to look at for several reasons. One is to see whether I made a mistake. I have made mistakes, and I like to get them corrected. So if you see something that needs to be corrected, let me know. But I will tell you, I'm going to be 80 years of age this year, and I know how difficult remembering things sometimes is. But I gave a talk in New Paltz once where I talked about the Phillies Bridge, and I gave a date when it was burned. And afterwards, a gentleman came up to me and said, I have the wrong date, because he remembered dating a girl and walking across that bridge after the date when I said it was burned. So I said, gee, I could have made a mistake. I went home, I looked at my notes, and I had what I thought was the right date. And that date came from a newspaper article in the Kingston Freeman. And the Kingston Freeman had a picture of it burning on a particular date. So he and I had a talk subsequently. He realized that he misremembered, that he hadn't crossed that bridge as late as after it was burned. So it is possible when you copy and paste that you make a mistake or you misremember something. Anybody
Donna,
else?
you have all of our emails from sending us notices and so on. That would be appreciated if you can get those links and just send a quick email. That'd be great.
Okay, Donna has that capacity.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Thank you.
Donna has it. Incidentally, this is, I give a talk on some topic, probably once a month, but it's usually in a hall with people. And when Donna invited me last year to speak at the museum, it was a fairly large group. Donna, would you say 40 plus people?
Definitely. We had a lot of people.
Yeah, it was a very, very large group. And, Grahamsville is a tiny little town, a tiny little hamlet, I guess. Is it a town or a hamlet?
A hamlet, I think.
Hamlet. We talks that we give around here. New Paltz has a historical society. The town of Lloyd has a historical side. Town of Saugerties has a historical side. Some of them get 20 people, 30 people, 50 people, 100 people as well. And Donna asked, since I was supposed to give this talk at the museum in April, And obviously I couldn't give it in April, and so I was disappointed. And then when Donna said, well, could you do it as a Zoom talk? While I've given a lot of Zoom-like talks before, I had not specifically used Zoom to do it. And so this was a trial, and it worked reasonably well.
I think it worked really well. Thank you so much.
I have a
Very
question
well.
or something, Donna. Mr. Knapp?
Yes, hi.
Well, I was just wanted to say something about the Never Sink Bridge, which you said was underwater. Which,
I said maybe underwater. So.
yeah, well, what happened to it originally, it was burned by arson in the 1920s because the people in town thought it needed repair and no one was doing it. So it was replaced by an iron bridge before it went underwater.
Oh, so the Iron Bridge went underwater. Is that right then?
Right. And the
Okay.
iron bridge was gone, but when the reservoir was really low in the 1960s, you could see the abutments from that bridge in a picture that was in a local newspaper. And I think we have a picture at the museum of the abutments that were there from that bridge.
Okay, that's a very useful piece of information. Did you say in the 1920s it was burned?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
and then when was the Iron Bridge? Did the Iron Bridge go in?
Well, when the reservoir was completed in the 1940s or to 1950, whenever it went underwater, it was taken down, that bridge.
Okay, I'm pretty sure the information that I got concerning that came from what's called lostbridges.com, lostbridges.org.
Okay.
If you go into the Sullivan County Lost Bridges, they have some descriptions there of information they've been given. And I think they are the one that says the bridge was, went underwater.
Well,
And
there may
there's
have
a
been
link.
two covered bridges in that little town also, a lower bridge and an upper bridge. The one that was burned was the upper bridge that went to Liberty, and the lower bridge went to Hasbrook and Woodburn.
This is
That
very,
one
very,
became an iron bridge too.
this
That's
is very,
all I
very,
know.
this is very, very useful. And what I typically will do with a piece of information like this, especially if we're talking about 20th century conditions, is try to find a newspaper article that corroborates it.
Right.
And usually you can find that, in the 20th
There was
century.
probably an article in the Sullivan County Democrat because the information I got about the fire was from down the decades in the Sullivan County Democrat. So perhaps in that newspaper there would be an article on the burning of that bridge.
Okay, I will change this on my PowerPoint, but obviously it's going to continue to be wrong in the recorded one. And this is one of the dangers, and that is that when people see something in a presentation, or they see it written, they believe it's absolute fact. And one of the things I tried to say a couple times in this talk is there probably are as many as, or more than, or it is likely that this bridge was preceded by one other bridge or two other bridges, because there's so much information we really do not know about bridges we think we know an awful lot about.
Yeah, well, I don't even know if I know, but that's just what I've seen about it.
Okay, we'll see if we can track that down.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Lynn.
Ron,
Yeah.
can you look at the Zoom group chat? Do you have access to that? Because a couple people were asking questions through that.
Let me see here.
I might be the only one that can see it, but I have a question from Harold Van Aken, who wanted to know when the Wallkill Bridge was built and by whom it was built. Let me
just see here. No, I can't.
It's the orange button at the bottom.
Yeah, because I have a full screen here, I can't access it at the bottom. I'm at the top, and
Somebody else asked the question about where they can find more information about the Bridgeville covered bridge.
Okay, actually, I found the chat. Okay. It's at the top with mine. Actually, I will tell you, it looks like Bill, who is actually the president of the National Society for the Preservation of Covered Bridges, that he's thanking you, Lynn, for that information concerning the Neversink Bridge, and we'll look into it to update the information on lostbridges.org. Okay, so let's see how I can get to the next one here. Okay, are these images in the book you mentioned, pictures of the Sullivan County bridges and these trusses? Oh my goodness. Yes and no. Several of the bridges are featured in the book. Let me tell you which ones. The Halls Mills Bridge is featured. That's the only one that is featured, but there are pictures of other ones in the book. Remember, it covers the complete country. When was the Wallkill Bridge built? Okay, that is one. No, when you say the Wallkill Bridge, are you talking about the bridge in Wallkill or the Wallkill River Bridge in New Paltz? That's in Harold. The bridge.
Now that would be the Wallkill Bridge in Wallkill.
Okay, I don't have that right here in my head. I'd have to do a little checking with that. But whatever you would find, you probably would find it on lostbridges.org.
Now I've looked at that.
Yes, it's not there.
Nobody seems to know when that bridge was built, because there's a 1799 map that shows a bridge across the Wallkill at Wallkill.
Okay, this is the issue that I'm really wrestling with, and that is that we can find early maps, late 18th century, early 19th century maps that show bridges, and I can find documentary evidence of a bridge at a certain location, but I don't know if it's a covered bridge. And one of the problems is when you look at a lot of historical information, if somebody saw a bridge at the end of the 19th century, and then they saw an early 19th century reference to a bridge, they automatically think that covered bridge was the bridge that was mentioned early on. Unless you find corroborating evidence, and I usually want two pieces of corroborating evidence before I will say definitively that a specific bridge was a covered bridge. And that makes it very, very tough really to state it. Now, if, for example, we can dig up the fact that there was a covered bridge across the Wallkill River in Wallkill in 1799, did you say 1799?
That it's probably not at the location where the covered bridge was built. The covered bridge was built on Bruin Turnpike.
Okay.
Bruin Turnpike, nobody seems to know when that was actually. That's very early.
Well, so often with these sorts of things, it's very easy to say nobody knows, but I would always add nobody knows yet. If you keep digging in the records, you may find it. Obviously, nobody took a photograph of it at the end of the 18th century, early part of the 19th century, but somebody may have drawn it, for example. Somebody may have written in a letter that they went through the covered bridge. But if they just simply say they crossed the bridge, for example, that's not enough to say that they crossed a covered bridge or went through a covered bridge.
Right. The 1799 bridge was probably a pile of stone and timbers across the wide part of the Wallkill where the flow was reasonably good. But that was also where the Revolutionary War troops were practicing across the Wallkill. and supposedly even visited by Washington. And I can't imagine he forded the river, but
One of the things that we don't see very much today is we don't see many examples of the very old, what are called trestle bridges. But trestle bridges were very common in the United States. What we're talking about here is pounding some verticals into a stream bed, for example, and then putting horizontals across it, and then putting planks across it to create a bridge. Now, many of these, if they existed in the past, were washed away or taken away or became not particularly useful. We just don't see them. I've actually sought pictures of them. I can't find them in the United States, but I can find hundreds of them in China that are very, very old, as well as many that are very, very new. And that's because people, if they need to get across, they create something that may serve an emerging, immediate kind of purpose that is not built to last forever. And if the bridge falls down or the bridge is washed away, they pick up the pieces and put it back together again. And so many of our bridges, many of our rivers that were bridged clearly must have been bridged with small bridges, trestle type bridge in the past, even if we don't have pictures of them.
FaceTime video. FaceTime.
Sorry, I couldn't help you with that.
that's all right. I'll keep searching one of these days.
Yeah, if you find something, let me know.
Well, it's interesting. The Wallkill covered bridge, that was replaced with a concrete bridge, and then they tore the Wallkill bridge down, the covered bridge, but then they condemned, the county condemned the concrete bridge, and then they rebuilt the covered bridge with piles of stone and timbers across. That pictures of, if you've ever seen that.
No, I'm not sure.
I'll send it to you.
Yeah, I can be reached at just simply knappr@newpaltz.edu.
Okay, yeah, I have your email. I've been in contact with you.
Yeah, I was going to say, we've been in contact before.
Yeah, you were going to do a talk in Wallkill, and then you got sick a couple of years ago.
I forgot about that, yeah.
Making a talk in one day.
Now, I see I've heard from somebody who lives in Bridgeville, would like more information about the Bridgeville Bridge. So would I. As soon as I had a chance, I'm going to go down to the Sullivan County Historical Society's archives and see what I can find there. But believe me, there's precious little about that bridge. But even though there is precious little, it is such an important bridge. I think people in New York State need to know about that bridge. Let's see if there's another chat.
That's an interesting bridge, and there's a lot to learn about it.
It is.
Well, thank you. It was a very interesting presentation, a lot more interesting than the one I made.
What do you mean, the one you're in?
Well, no, the one that I made when you couldn't make it to ours.
Oh, I see. Okay, well, anyway, it was fun to do this. I'm glad so many of you were here. It looks like there were probably close to 40 folks here, which, I mean, this is an unbelievably beautiful day in New Paltz. And I think we ought to get out and enjoy the rest of it.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.